If you wait until your kale looks like lace and your collards look tired, you are already late. Most gardeners learn that after the damage is done. They think the problem begins when the holes show up, or when a white puff lifts off the leaves, or when the plant starts looking weak enough to make them worry. But by then, the feeding has already started, the eggs have already been laid, and the bed is no longer asking for prevention, it is asking for rescue. And rescue is always more expensive, more time, more frustration, more second-guessing, more bottles on the porch. Because whiteflies and caterpillars do not take your kale and collards in one dramatic attack. They take them quietly, in little pieces, while the gardener is still telling himself everything looks mostly fine. That is why the smartest move is not to hunt for the strongest spray. It is to stop thinking of pest control as a product problem and start treating it like a reading problem. Your plants tell you what is coming long before they start begging for help. The mistake is that most people are looking for damage when they should be looking for early signs of pressure. That one shift changes everything. A lot of gardeners lump these pests together because the result feels similar. Leaves suffer, growth slows, the harvest gets uglier. But whiteflies and caterpillars work differently, and if you fight them as if they are the same thing, you waste effort and lose time. Whiteflies are not chewing insects. They feed by piercing and sucking. They gather on the undersides of leaves, especially in warm, still air and thick leafy growth, and they build their numbers quietly. A plant under whitefly pressure may not look torn up at first. It may seem a little tired, a little dusty, a little less full of life than it should. Maybe the leaves feel sticky. Maybe ants start showing unusual interest. Maybe a grayish film begins where honeydew and mold can follow. Then one day, you brush the plant and a cloud rises. That moment feels dramatic, but it is not the beginning. It is the reveal. Caterpillars are different. They are not draining the plant slowly. They are eating it. Sometimes they start as tiny pinholes that are easy to dismiss. Sometimes you see small scraped patches on a leaf. Sometimes you see dark droppings, those little pellets many people overlook, tucked in the center of the plant or resting on the lower leaves. Then, almost overnight, you get ragged edges, bigger holes, and damage close to the heart where the plant can least afford it. A small cabbage worm becomes a serious eater in a hurry. So the first contrarian truth is this: the battle is not won by reacting harder. It is won by noticing sooner. That sounds simple because it is simple. But simple is not the same as easy. Most people do not lose brassicas because they are lazy. They lose them because the garden rewards habits that feel too ordinary to matter. Turning over a leaf, looking twice at the center, checking the bed before the sun gets high, watching what kind of insect is actually present, instead of spraying first and identifying later. These do not feel like grand acts of gardening. They feel small. Yet they are the habits that separate a bed that feeds you from a bed that teaches you a lesson. If you grew up around practical gardeners, you may remember how little they wasted. And not just in money. They did not waste motion. They did not waste worry. They had a way of walking a row and seeing what mattered. Not everything. What mattered? One leaf out of place. One chewed center. One insect where there had been none yesterday. That kind of judgment was never fancy, but it was powerful. And it is still available if you slow down enough to recover it. The second thing that changes the game is understanding when your kale and collards are most vulnerable. Brassicas often look strongest when they are growing fast, throwing big leaves, filling space, looking almost luxurious. But that lushness can invite trouble. Tender new growth is attractive. Dense canopies hold still air. Overfed plants can become soft and easy to work over. That does not mean you should starve them. It means the goal is not simply big leaves as fast as possible. The goal is sturdy growth you can actually bring to harvest. So before we even talk about treatments, start with the setup that makes pests less comfortable. Give your kale and collards room. Not ceremonial room. Real airflow. If leaves from neighboring plants are constantly pressed together, you have built shelter for whiteflies and hiding places for small worms. Keep weeds down around the base, especially anything that creates a low tangle under the crop. Water the soil, not the leaves, whenever you can. Remove old yellowing leaves that no longer serve the plant and only create clutter. Do not let your bed become a padded apartment complex for pests. And watch the nitrogen. Gardeners love green growth, and brassicas respond to fertility, but there is a difference between healthy vigor and a kind of overindulgent softness that practically invites sucking insects to move in. If you push too hard, especially in warm weather, you can create a crop that looks rich to your eye, and tastes rich to pests. The plant should be thriving, not pampered into weakness. Now let's get more specific, because prevention only works if it turns into action. For whiteflies, the first job is disturbance. They like to settle. They like calm. They like the quiet underside of a leaf where nobody bothers them. A gardener who regularly checks and lightly disrupts that space notices trouble sooner and slows comfort. When you inspect, do not just stare down from above. Lift the leaf, turn it over, run your eyes along the veins, brush the plant gently and watch. If white insects rise and resettle, do not tell yourself you will deal with it later. Later is how they become a population instead of a sighting. If pressure is light, a strong spray of plain water directed to the undersides of leaves can help knock adults loose and disturb the cycle. Not once, repeatedly. That is the part some people dislike. They want a single heroic act. Gardening is usually a series of timely, modest acts. Water alone is not magic, and it will not solve a heavy infestation, but early on, it can reduce numbers and buy you ground, especially if you combine it with better airflow and closer inspection. The point is not just removal. The point is refusing to let the plant become a safe resting place. Yellow sticky traps can also tell you what is happening. They are not a full answer, and I would not trust them as the only line of defense, but they are useful as a warning system. When those traps start catching more adults around your brassicas, that is information. It tells you to inspect harder, not relax, because the trap is doing all the work. Prevention likes warning signs. Smart gardeners use them. If you need to step up beyond water, insecticidal soap can help with whiteflies when it actually reaches them. That phrase matters. When it actually reaches them. Spraying the top of the leaves and calling it done will not get you far, because whiteflies spend their lives where rushed gardeners fail to look. Coverage matters. Timing matters. Repetition matters. And because soaps can affect beneficial insects too, if used carelessly, the goal is not blanket enthusiasm. The goal is targeted use when the pressure and the timing justify it. That brings us to one of the most overlooked parts of preventing whiteflies before they become overwhelming. The best time to act is when your ego says the bed still looks okay. That is hard for people. We like obvious problems because obvious problems feel real. Subtle pressure feels easy to postpone. But the gardener who wins is often the one who treats the almost invisible stage as the important stage. Caterpillars require a different eye and a different kind of discipline. With them, your strongest ally is not motion, but interruption of the life cycle. The adults are often easy to ignore because butterflies seem innocent and moths seem ordinary. Yet if white cabbage butterflies are drifting and dipping around your kale bed, they are not there for scenery. They are looking for a place to lay eggs. And eggs are the cheapest stage of the problem you will ever handle. So learn what to look for. Tiny pale eggs, often on the undersides of leaves. Small clusters sometimes, single eggs other times, depending on the species. You do not need a laboratory mindset. You just need the habit of looking underneath and along the ribs. If you find them, remove them, wipe them, crush them, be decisive. It is cleaner work than trying to negotiate with half-grown worms later. Then there is the sign many people skip right past. Fresh frass. Those dark little droppings are as useful as footprints. If you see them, especially in the center of the plant, stop and inspect right there. Not later, right there. Caterpillars often hide close by, blending with the leaf, hugging the midrib, tucking into folds where the new leaves gather. They count on your quick glance. Do not give them one. Handpicking sounds old-fashioned because it is old-fashioned, and it still works. Not for every pest at every scale, but for caterpillars in home gardens, it is one of the surest early interventions you have. A small problem can remain small if you simply remove the eaters before they size up. People sometimes dismiss handpicking because it lacks drama, but I have seen more kale saved by fingers and daily attention than by panic buying. If pressure climbs, Bacillus thuringiensis, often sold as BT, can be useful against caterpillars when applied at the right time. It works best on small larvae, not on a situation you ignored until everything is visibly shredded. Again, early matters. Again, the undersides and the growing points matter. Again, repetition after rain or heavy watering may matter. The bigger lesson is not the brand or the bottle. The bigger lesson is that even a targeted tool works best when paired with observation, not substituted for it. Now here is a point some gardeners resist because it sounds too plain to be important. Barriers beat heroics. If caterpillars are a yearly problem in your garden, lightweight row cover used early, before the adults lay eggs on the crop, can save you an enormous amount of trouble. Not after damage begins. Before. That is the whole theme here. Before. If the cover goes on when the plants are clean and secure, and the edges are closed well, you are not fighting worms. You are preventing egg laying. That is a different kind of win. The same principle applies to transplants. A lot of pest trouble walks into the garden unnoticed. People bring home beautiful young brassicas, or raise their own seedlings, set them out, and never inspect them closely first. But if eggs, aphids, or whiteflies ride in on those tender young plants, you have imported your own future frustration. Before anything goes into the bed, check it like it matters, because it does. Another correction that saves a lot of heartache is this: damaged leaves are not your only measure of urgency. People see a few holes and think, I can live with that. And maybe you can. Not every bite is a crisis. But the location of the damage matters more than the drama of the damage. Outer leaves on a vigorous collard can take some abuse. Damage in the central growing point is different. That is where the plant makes tomorrow. If caterpillars are feeding in the heart, the future of the plant is on the menu. That deserves fast action. Likewise with whiteflies. A little adult flutter on a mature plant is not the same as a rising population on young tender growth during warm weather. One is an annoyance. The other is a trend. Prevention depends on learning the difference between a passing nuisance and a developing pattern. And patterns matter more than one day's snapshot. A gardener gets in trouble when every inspection feels isolated. Today looks okay. Tomorrow looks okay. The next day seems mostly okay. Then suddenly it is not. But gardens do not usually change suddenly. Our awareness does. What looked sudden was often gradual pressure we failed to read. That is why I encourage people to pick a few plants in each bed as sentinels. Not because they are special, but because you will remember them. The same 3 or 4 plants, checked regularly, can tell you whether pressure is increasing, holding steady, or fading. That is harder to fake in your own mind than wandering by and making a casual guess. There is also a timing rule that deserves more respect. Warm spells accelerate trouble. If the weather turns hot and still, or if a stretch of mild days speeds growth and insect activity together, tighten your inspection rhythm. Do not wait for the weekend if the garden is telling you the week changed. Pests do not honor your schedule. They honor opportunity. Now, some people hear all this and think it sounds like too much attention for a few plants, but this is where perspective matters. We are not talking about babying ornamentals for bragging rights. We are talking about food. Kale and collards are supposed to be dependable crops. They are part of the reason so many people start growing seriously in the first place, because once established, they can feed you generously. Letting them get quietly stripped by problems you could have caught early is frustrating not only because you lose leaves, but because you lose trust. You start to feel like the garden is always one step ahead of you. Prevention is how you reverse that feeling, and the good news is that you do not need perfect control. You need pressure low enough that the plants stay vigorous and the harvest stays worthwhile. That is a much more achievable goal. A few insect bites do not mean failure. One butterfly in the yard does not mean disaster. The obsession with spotless leaves sometimes leads gardeners into overreaction, and overreaction creates its own problems. The aim is not sterile plants. The aim is strong plants that are not being overwhelmed. That means your response should fit the level of trouble. If you find a couple of caterpillar eggs, remove them and keep watching. If you see light whitefly activity, disturb it. Improve airflow. Inspect again in a day or two. If pressure rises, step up deliberately with soap, BT, covers, or more consistent removal. But do not skip straight to war over every sign of life. Gardens are living places. Judgment matters here more than intensity. There is another practical detail many people learn too late. Old damaged leaves can keep you emotionally stuck in the past. You treat the plant, the pressure drops, but the ragged leaves remain, and you keep feeling like nothing improved. Learn to tell old damage from new damage. Old holes do not heal. Old chew marks stay. The question is whether fresh feeding continues, whether new frass appears, whether clean new growth is coming in. That is how you measure whether your prevention and intervention are working. Not by wishing the old leaf could become unbitten. Sometimes the best move is also thinning your own harvest. If your kale bed is so full that you can barely inspect it, start picking more aggressively. Use the leaves. Open the canopy. Let light and air in. Collards especially can handle steady harvesting if the plant is otherwise healthy. A bed that feeds the kitchen consistently is often easier to protect than a bed left to become crowded and sentimental. And do not overlook sanitation, though I say that word cautiously because it can sound bigger than it is. I simply mean, do not leave heavily infested or badly chewed material sitting around the crop if it is clearly serving as shelter and reproduction space. Remove what is truly spent. Clean up what is pulling the whole bed downward. Compost practices vary, climates vary, and every gardener has to judge what makes sense in their setting. But allowing the weakest, most infested foliage to remain untouched because you do not want to be harsh is not kindness. It is procrastination dressed as patience. One of the most useful habits I know is pairing inspection with a routine chore you already do. If you water by hand, inspect while you water. If you harvest outer leaves every few days, inspect as you harvest. If you walk the garden at dusk just to breathe out from the day, let that be when you lift a few leaves and look. Prevention fails when it lives only in good intentions. It works when it becomes part of what you already do. And let me say something that might save a beginner from a lot of unnecessary shame. Having whiteflies or caterpillars does not mean you are a bad gardener. It means you are growing the kind of plants they like, in the kind of season they know how to exploit. That is all. The question is not whether pests ever appear. The question is whether you notice early enough to keep them from deciding the whole bed belongs to them. In fact, some of the most disappointed gardeners are the ones who believed healthy soil alone would make pests irrelevant. Healthy soil matters deeply. It helps plants grow with resilience. It supports recovery. It can improve overall vigor. But healthy soil does not cancel insect appetite. Good fertility is not an invisibility cloak. If anything, a thriving stand of brassicas can be attractive. Soil health is a foundation, not a force field. Once you understand that, you stop feeling betrayed by reality and start working with it more honestly. You also stop falling for the idea that one perfect input will solve everything. The garden almost never rewards that kind of thinking. It rewards layers, airflow, inspection, timing, physical removal, targeted treatment when needed, protection before egg laying, steady harvesting, accurate reading of new growth. None of those alone is the whole answer. Together, they make the bed much harder to overrun. That layered approach is especially important if you want to protect beneficial insects while still defending your crop. The more precisely you read the problem, the less broad and clumsy your response needs to be. Spraying everything, everywhere, on a schedule you chose in fear, often creates more collateral damage than actual control. But a gardener who knows what pest is present, how much pressure exists, where it lives on the plant, and what stage it is in, can act with a lighter hand and better timing. That is not only better for the garden, it feels better. You stay in relationship with the place instead of fighting it blindly. Now let's talk about what to do when you are already seeing enough trouble to worry, but you are not yet in full disaster. This is the point where a calm sequence matters. First, inspect thoroughly. Not one plant, several. Learn whether the problem is scattered or concentrated. Whiteflies often cluster in certain calmer, denser zones first. Caterpillars may show up on a few plants before spreading. Second, remove what you can by hand at once. Eggs, worms, badly infested leaves if necessary. Third, improve the physical conditions. Thin, harvest, clear clutter, reduce the sheltered feeling pests like. Fourth, apply the appropriate targeted response if the level justifies it. Soap for whiteflies if coverage is possible. BT for small caterpillars if they are present. Covers for plants that can still be protected cleanly. Then revisit soon. Not in 2 weeks. Soon. Early prevention turns into effective control only if you confirm the pressure actually changed. That revisit is where most lessons are learned. Did new frass appear? Are fresh inner leaves clean? Do sticky undersides seem reduced? Do adults still rise in a cloud? Or only here and there? Is the damage now old damage only? These are the questions that build competence. And competence is addictive in the best way. Once you experience a season where you caught the problem before it ran wild, you stop craving miracle solutions. You start trusting well-timed ordinary actions. There is also a deeper reason this matters, and if you have gardened for a few years, you probably know what I mean. Growing food is not only about calories or money, though those count. It is also about whether your own judgment means anything in your daily life. A lot of modern life trains people to outsource judgment. Wait until something breaks badly, then buy the approved fix. Trust the label. Trust the ad. Trust the feed. But a garden teaches a quieter and better lesson. Notice early. Learn patterns. Act before you are desperate. Trust what the leaves are telling you. That is old, practical knowledge, and it is not old because it is quaint. It is old because it kept working. Your kale and collards do not need you to be a chemist. They do not need you to be online every hour. They do not need a dramatic personality. They need a gardener who will look under the leaf before the leaf is ruined. They need someone who understands that the easiest caterpillar to remove is the one that has barely started feeding, and the easiest whitefly problem to manage is the one you treated as a warning instead of an afterthought. So, the next time you walk out to the garden, do not just ask whether the bed looks pretty from a distance. Ask a better question. What story is this plant telling before the obvious part begins? Are the undersides clean? Is there fresh frass? Are butterflies lingering too long? Are the leaves crowded and soft and sheltered? Is new growth coming in strong, or is something sapping it? Those questions save crops. And if you already have a habit of growing brassicas, I would love to know which early sign you trust first in your own garden. Is it the tiny holes, the droppings, the sticky leaf, the flutter when you brush the plant, or the way the new growth suddenly looks less confident? Gardeners in different climates notice different warnings, and that kind of shared experience is worth more than most labels. Because in the end, stopping whiteflies and caterpillars before they ruin your kale and collards is not really about becoming aggressive. It is about being earlier. Earlier with your eyes, earlier with your hands, earlier with your barriers, earlier with your decisions, earlier with your understanding that prevention happens when the problem is still quiet enough to ignore. Do not ignore it. That small cloud under a leaf, that little line of eggs, that first dark pellet tucked in the center, that soft, crowded growth you keep meaning to thin, those are not minor details. They are the fork in the road. One path leads to salvage. The other leads to regret and shredded harvest bowls. Choose the earlier path, and your garden starts feeling different. Not perfect, not sterile, just legible, manageable. Yours again. And once you learn to read brassicas this way, you will start noticing other things differently too. You will see how often the garden gives you a quiet chance before it gives you a loud consequence. That is a lesson bigger than kale, but kale is a good place to learn it.